Welcome to the Avro Heritage Museum podcast.
Ian Peat talks about the role that Woodford played in the later service life and the disposal of the Vickers VC10 RAF fleet. So, Ian, we're going to be talking about VC10, and we have an aircraft actually at the museum, don't we? Just tell us a bit about the actual aircraft that's here.
Yes, we do. We have VC10 XV106, which actually is an ex-RAF aeroplane. It's used for air-to-air refuelling and transport purposes, and provided those services with the RAF for between 1966 and 2011 in that particular aeroplane's case. And we, many people might wonder why we've got a Vickers aeroplane at the Avro Museum.
Exactly.
So the long story is, and I'll cut it fairly short, Vickers started the VC10 program in the 1950s, and the first flight of the VC10 happened in 1962, I think. And the project was run by Vickers at Weybridge in London. Now, most of the early VC10s were manufactured for BOAC, which is now British Airways, and for other Atlantic and...
So it was long haul
operations.
Because they had BEA, didn't they, for the short haul European?
BEA short. So... it was recognised by the Royal Air Force that the VC10 had got some fantastic capabilities. So they put an order in for a good number of VC10s, and they became the transport aircraft of choice.
Could I ask you, is that normal? Do the RAF sort of keep an eye on what's coming out commercially with a view to that might be new for us, or was that of its era?
Well, no, you'd probably argue it's true today, because the current air-to-air refuelling and tanker fleet, once again, is a commercial aeroplane, the Airbus A330. So they've looked at that, and they've been able to modify that appropriately to turn it into a tanking aeroplane.
Right, interesting, yeah. So they spotted the potential
of the
VC10,
and they bought a number of VC10s. Known as the VC10 C1, and then eventually became C1K, which the K means, I think it's a NATO designation for a tanking aeroplane. And those aeroplanes, as well as the commercial fleets, operated for those operators for a long time. Around about 1988, British Aerospace decided to close the Weybridge site. Now, Weybridge provided all the design support and engineering support and supply support to the VC10 fleets, both commercial and military, and the only military ones being the RAF ones, of course. So as the commercial fleets were running down, the likes of British Airways and East African Airways were kind of getting rid of their aircraft. The British Aerospace closed Weybridge, and they put the design and engineering and supply support requirements up here to Woodford and Chadderton, the two Manchester sites, transferring if like that capability from Weybridge to here. I think I'm right in saying that they requested lots of people to come up north.
That's a long way, isn't it? It's Surrey, isn't it?
Move house and relocate to the Manchester area. And if my recollection is correct, I think only 2 people did. And what that meant was fairly quickly the people in the Manchester factories had to very quickly pick up speed to actually support the VC10 fleets that were operating. As I said, the commercial fleets were mostly coming out of service at that point. So the one large fleet that was still operating was the RAF fleet. So Woodford and Chadderton then, from 1988 onwards, supported the fleet. And towards the back end of the program, probably around about 2003, 2004, the budgets were becoming quite tight within the Ministry of Defence, as they always do, and they wanted to get more bang for the buck. So BAE Systems, as it's now called, from British Aerospace, came up with a new contracting arrangement and basically an availability contract with the RAF, which meant that they'd guarantee a certain number of aircraft out from depth maintenance into first line capabilities. So they had more aircraft more frequently at lower cost. And that availability contract developed over a period of time. It was actually called Javelin, and it was quite a long name, but it stood for the Joint Approach to VC10 Engineering, Logistics and Integration. And it worked very well. And it won quite a few awards, both within BAE Systems and within the MOD. So everybody was happy with it. But as the VC10 programme started to run down towards the back end of the 2000s, 2008, 2009, it was recognised there was a need to dispose of VC10 aircraft in a commercially sensible, environmentally sensible way. So we, BAE Systems, picked up the overall project management responsibility for disposing of the fleet that was left. I think off the top of my head, it was something like 12 aeroplanes to be disposed of. And all aeroplanes were meant to be scrapped at this point. When we started the programme, we looked for a subcontractor, an organisation that knew how to dispose of aeroplanes sensibly, because BAE Systems doesn't do that. BAE Systems manufactures aeroplanes and it supports aeroplanes, but didn't have any capability to actually dispose of aircraft. So we brought in a company called GJD Services and we worked with them. We, with GJD, identified that Bruntingthorpe Airfield in Leicestershire would be the disposal place. And over a fairly short period of time, we worked with them to make sure we got all the capabilities in place. We'd satisfied all the environmental requirements that were necessary. And the first aircraft came in. Again, I think off the top of my head, it was XV104. So it was a direct flight in from Bryce Norton. And over a period of 6 or so weeks, that aeroplane was broken down, and two things happened. One, most of the aircraft was turned into bean tins. Most of the aircraft was used for reuse, recycling. So your bean tins of nowadays may be part of it.
Bits of a VC10, yeah.
Bits of a VC10. But actually, a lot of the avionic items and flight usable items is probably the best way of putting it, were recovered and recycled.
Right.
Because as you take an old aeroplane out of service, but you're still operating old aeroplanes of that type, actually the spares become less and less, and these can be very useful.
Yeah, I got to ask, were there any security issues? Was there any stuff in there that that the MOD were quite careful about? I just wonder whether there were any.
Yes, there were. It's a good question.
Yeah.
Yes, there were. There were a number of items which we had to be very careful with them. In fact, they had American ITAR designations against them, which meant that we had to be very careful about who actually handled them. But those were sent back into the Bryce Norton supply chain. And from there on, all the VC10s that came out of service until the last ones still had this, what they call spares recovery program, which kept the other aircraft flying. And I think in 2012, we knew that there was the Libya campaign, and the VC10 did a lot of air-to-air refuelling in that campaign. And the availability contract that BAE Systems had stood up. The aircraft were available to the RAF, and they delivered the transport and the air-to-air refuelling as required.
Because you never know what events are going to occur, do you?
No, that's right.
Yeah.
Now, as the programme ran down and the RAF got more comfortable with the fact that the new A330 Voyager programme was going to come into play, Air Tanker being the contracting organisation who currently run the programme, those aircraft started to appear out of the production line down at Toulouse and appeared on the flight line at Bryce Norton. People started to be trained, so therefore they could start to really release the final VC10s, and they all came for disposal to Bruntingthorpe. As I said earlier, the plan was to actually dispose of all VC10s, turn them all into bean tins. but it was recognised that it might be a good idea to keep a number of these. And GJD Services, their managing director, Gary Spores, he negotiated with the Disposal Service Authority, who got responsibility for all of these items, to retain a number of cockpits. And so he did. He basically disposed of most of the aircraft, but kept a number of cockpits.
I suppose because, in a way, that's the most interesting part, isn't it, really, if you're going to keep it?
But then also, as time developed, we were also able, well, he was also able to do a deal to maintain and keep a number of whole VC10s.
Oh, great. Mm-hmm.
So there was I think ZA147 down at in Cornwall, ZA150 at Dunsfold, which many people probably see on the old Top Gear programs.
Oh, that's the airfield, is it? Yeah.
To see them. And I think ZB241 at Bruntingthorpe for a while. And then also XR808. Now, 808, if you think about it, 808 sounds like Bob, so it's known as Bob. And that was actually dismantled at Bruntingthorpe and road moved by GJD on behalf of the RAF Museum to Cosford. So we've actually retained one of the VC10 fleet at Cosford, which is good news. Oh. Now, for us, we were setting up the museum in 2015, and once people realised that the Woodford's involvement with VC10 programme went back over 25 years at that point, then actually, why would you not want to bring the VC10
perfect place
into the Avro Museum? And we spoke to Gary Spores, who he said, yes, I've got a spare cockpit, XV106. So we did a deal with him. He still owns it. We're loaning it. And we brought it here to Woodford. We put appropriate steps in place so people can actually access the cockpit. It's a wonderful cockpit. It's nice. There's lots of room in it. Most of the instruments are still in there. We had to take 1 or 2 out as part of the earlier spares recovery program. And if we can ever find those parts on eBay, we'll put them back into the aeroplane. But in itself, it's just a great display of a 1960s vintage cockpit.
Yeah, and if you come to the museum, obviously you pay your entrance fee, but you only have to pay an extra £2 and you can get a guided tour. Sometimes with somebody who's flown those planes, and will tell you wonderful stories about actually them being used for transport by the RAF for politicians and the royal family.
Well, yes. Well, the Queen always said her favourite aeroplane was the VC10.
Yeah. So if you come and visit, you can actually sit on the seat where the Queen sat. You can see in the right-hand seat is where Prince Philip sat, and actually flew it on one occasion. You've given a pretty good story there, haven't you? Because I think when people come to the museum, they are interested on how does it get here. That in itself is interesting, isn't it? Yeah. And isn't it great that that there were people there who did have the nous to think, we can't scrap all these things. We've got to keep the heritage. Ian, thank you ever so much.
Make sure you follow us in your podcast app to ensure that you don't miss out on future episodes.